Hi class, this is chapter 4, introduction to this chapter. It's physical development in infancy. This is from birth to 18 to 24 months of age is kind of the range we're looking at. And as I look at this, there are some specific things that I always emphasize in my class. First, it starts out by looking at two major growth patterns, the cephalocaudal pattern of growth and the proximal distal pattern of growth. That kind of sets the tone for the physical development of it. What is, to me, well, it's all pretty interesting to me, but what fascinates me is how it goes into the development of neurons. Neurons at this stage, as they mature and they connect, it's what they call myelination. And so this is more of an introduction to that, the changes in neurons that occur during this process. Let's see. One of the other things that I highlight frequently in the class is introduction to Michael Rabin. Michael Rabin was an interesting person. He was experiencing, I think it was like 300 seizures a day. It was just a horrific seizure disorder that he had, and so that it required the doctors to do a very invasive brain surgery in which they removed the left side of his brain. Now, if you remember, I think I've introduced, if not, you've seen it in my one-on-one classes, the left side of the brain deals with, not only, but a big component is speech. We've got Wernicke's region, which deals with, it's in the temporal lobe, deals with the ability to understand speech. And then we've got Broca's region, which is in the frontal lobe, that's our ability to speak. Well, what they thought was going to happen is that when they had to remove that left side of his brain, that he would have lost the ability to speak. But it just is amazing how the brain is able to compensate for loss. And he is an adult now, surely he's an adult by now, but he's able to speak just like you or I do. It's really quite amazing. It's also an introduction into the ravages associated with neglect. The text emphasizes the Ceausescu regime, in which there was a bunch of children that were born. The dictator kind of mandated that people have children during this time frame. He would not allow birth control to occur, certainly wouldn't allow abortion to occur. And as a result of that, there was this huge population explosion, but mothers didn't want these children. And so there's a lot of children that were put in these orphanages and were severely neglected. And they show a picture of the brain activity, and you'll see a lot of black area in the brains of children that have had neglect. I've actually tested two of those children as adults. They came over here around age of 5 or 6, but by then, even then, the neglect was so severe that both those children I diagnosed with an intellectual development disorder. We discussed sleep, which is kind of interesting. What we find is that adults spend about 1/5 of our time in what they call rapid eye movement sleep, but infants spend 50% of their time, half of the time they're sleeping, they're in this rapid eye movement, this dream stage. And so the question, why? The answer is that during this actual dream stages, that's when there's this maturation of the brain that goes on. It looks at also SIDS, which is a horrific disorder, that we see in some children. They list in the text a bunch of the statistical causes for SIDS, but there really is no one finger we can put on. Surprisingly, the one thing that does actually help, and it's just a simple thing, is to put a rotating fan in the room going past the baby. It's pretty interesting. Nutrition, they mention that, and I always like to ask my class, what is the most common vegetable eaten by infants? And there's usually kind of a debate about, do they eat this or do they eat that? It's actually sad commentary on our society, French fries. That is the most common vegetable eaten during infancy. Let's see, we look at breast versus bottle feeding. I have a lot of students that do their research papers on that, which is really interesting. It's interesting. It can either be a simple paper or it can be an interesting paper. An interesting paper will look at the controversy associated with breastfeeding from a historical perspective. It also looks at the challenges that are happening legislatively as a result of mothers selling breast milk in one state to another state, crossing straight lines, or even within the state. And so there's some real challenges associated with that. It highlights the development of the reflexes, which is, an essential when I'm testing children this young. I want to see what their reflexes are, and there's a couple of them that the text. One of them the text doesn't talk about that you've got to do at home. It's called the Babinski reflex. And so what happens is that, imagine this is the baby's foot. This is the heel of the foot. If you put your finger down at the heel of the foot and bring it up, their toes spread out like little monkey's feet. It's kind of cool. I get to practice with my grandchildren, which is always exciting to me. Then the Mora reflex, and I would encourage you not to do this. I do it in my practice when I see what they call hypotonia. That means there's real super muscle looseness. And so what you do is you'll put the baby's head in your palm here, you'll drop your palm, and the baby's arms will go out, and then they'll cover their torso with their arms and legs. It's a reflex. These are automatic. They're not learned. And so when I have children with a disorder in their muscle movement, they're not having these reflexes. Example of reflexes I might just add is swallowing, blinking, those type of things. They talk about gross motor skills with Arnold Gesell. He kind of got things going in the direction. There's a nice little figure in your text that shows the progression going from laying prone to all the way to walking and all the steps in between there. Arnold Gesell, he believed that things happened absent of interaction with others, that it was hardwired into us. We now know that that's not necessarily the case, that there is opportunities to improve maybe speed up these developmental processes. One example the text mentions is Jamaica. Usain Bolt, coming from Jamaica, maybe his mother did that, but they have this kind of massage thing that they do with babies to help them to develop. When we look at sensory perception, two key things I'll just mention. Sensation is defined as occurs when information interaction with sensory receptors, eyes, ears, tongue, nostrils, and skin. So sensation is what we experience the world, and then there's perception, and that's very much culturally bound. So we will see things based off of our culture, and that's why you can create little unique cultures with children. You can can be imagining hearing little monsters in their home, and it's very real to them if you set the scenario up, because now their little culture, their perception is that there's little monsters everywhere, and when you rustle by the couch, oh, there's a monster there, that type of thing. So it becomes very real to them. Let's see what else. I'm just thinking of things that I typically will talk about in the class that kind of stand out. And I'm trying to do this within a 10-minute time frame. Touch and pain, I'll just mention that because that is kind of interesting to me. They used to believe that there was some debate about whether or not infants feel pain. Now, anybody that has a child will tell you, yeah, they feel pain. But the way they determined it is crazy. The way they determined it is they measured neurotransmitters, and one of them is cortisol. Cortisol is produced when we're under stress. They measured the amount of cortisol that's produced for children before they had a circumcision and after they had a circumcision. And they said, oh, yep, they produce cortisol, they must be feeling stress. And the last thing I end up is, why is Barney successful? You know who Barney is. Barney's successful because he has rhythm. And they talk about intermodal perception, that's tying two sensories together. So if Barney didn't keep rhythm to the music, he'd be off the air. All right, guys, well, that finishes up this chapter. Just a quick review of some highlights of it that I like to emphasize. And I hope this video has been helpful for you. Thank you.